ed è quindi con piacere che annuncio la relazione di Francesco Castellet y Ballarà, che è la prima della giornata in cui dal punto di vista neuropsicanalitico, psicanalitico, neuroscientifico, mi sembra riduttivo mettere le etichette, dal nostro punto di vista teorico e clinico, quello di Italia Psychoanalytic Dialogues che abbiamo costruito negli anni, proverà a rileggere quanto Commisura ha detto questa mattina, quindi dal punto di vista teorico, introdurrà qualche vignetta clinica. In quel momento naturalmente non apparirà sullo schermo, lo dico per chi ci segue online, perché per via della privacy credo non proiettiamo la parte clinica, e così anche domani evitiamo di proiettare la parte clinica, ma lui sarà abbastanza chiaro. Allora lo introduco il dottor Castellet, anche lui è fondatore di Italia Psychoanalytic Dialogues, full member della Società Italiana di Psicoanalisi. Ha una formazione, come tutti noi, molto composita, perché lui è anche neurologo, oltre ad essere psichiatra, quindi oltre ad essere psicanalista, lavora con l'agenzia dell'ESA come psichiatra, insegna neuroestetica all'Università di Tor Vergata. Cioè, come dire, penso che il suo punto di vista oggi veicoli anche tutte queste sue conoscenze. Quindi a te la parola, ti ascoltiamo con piacere.
Grazie a tutti. Io vorrei parlare in inglese, ma soprattutto vorrei avere le diapositive, se è possibile. Ok. Actually, this presentation is really an attempt to bridge psychoanalysis, neuropsychoanalysis, and the clinical ground. I will start just with a short description, a clinical description. G is a young woman who suffered abuse and neglect by both parents, who divorced when she was 4 years old. The mother was more neglecting, the father more physically, but not sexually abusive. She reaches usually orgasm. I'm sorry, but it's difficult to read from here. Okay. Fantasizing of a man spanking her in the buttocks, while she attacks verbally him with rage. Then the man performs fellatio on her. In her sex relationship, she was always make it very clear to the partner that she wants to have fun and not emotional bonds. She admits to not understand actually the difference between making love and have sex, since she never fell in love with someone. Let me see. Okay, let's try to bridge with the Komisaruk presentation. So the neuroscientific exploration of sexuality and orgasm, with some insight into our psychophysical functioning in intimate relationship. I cut this part here just to be faster, but the main part, or one interesting point that Komisaruk aroused, is that the erogenous touch zone extends beyond the skin and mucous genital areas to the whole body, including internal organs like prostate and cervix. But as a rule, all sensitivities are invoked, including visual stimulation, auditory, and of course olfactory, gustatory, and imaginative emotions that promote them. I will stress imaginative emotions. The individual variability of the ways of reaching orgasm is surprising. It highlights the role of the whole mind-body as well as the early embodied relational experience and the fantasies and emotions related to it that are actually one of our field of exploration in therapy. And just to enlarge a little bit the context, that is something that we could label comparative neuropsychoanalysis. Is important from my point of view also to the study of comparative sexology in other mammals that are extremely interesting. For example, the chimps and the bonobo sexual lifestyle are extremely different. In the picture is shown two bonobos having sex, and if you notice there are two grapefruits in the hands of the male, and that's why they are exchanging pleasure, in the sense that the female was asking for one of the fruits. So after the sexual intercourse, she will have it. And that's the good part, because bonobo actually resolve all the conflicts with sexuality. While chimps makes exactly the opposite in a way, more similar to ours, way of having sex, because they rape females of other clans if caught alone in the savannas. And harassment is a normal way to intimidation and forced sex towards the females, not to mention infanticide, in order to have the female available for sexuality. Continuing the comparisons with the Komisaruk works and others as well, I could say that orgasm is a top-down processes of our body-brain minds. The example of non-genital self-stimulations and the increasing prolactin that it provokes actually induce the same physiological changes as genital self-stimulation and result actually from a top-down processing in the brain. So orgasms are from the brain in a way. And that's a quote from Komisaruk's work on the 2010, page 21. We can affirm that orgasms are not sensation or a bottom-up process, but emotions. I will add a top-down interoceptions. Therefore, orgasms are not the result of stimulation given to us by our partner per se, even if their presence in fantasy at least is essential. But orgasms are emotions, interoception, which happen in between, I will say, in the fantasy or narrative, we be the alone masturbations or together. And so we came to the central part of this presentation, that is the model promoted by Freestone in the beginning of 2010. And that's a quote from him: "The brain is a fantastic organ, in the sense that it continuously produces a fantasy about the outside world." Eventually you can spot all the presentation on YouTube, me and my Marco blanket. So we are talking about the emotion mind or predictive processing that has been developed about some data, neurophysiological data as well. It is very consistent, I would say, for the visual system. For example, only 1 upon 10 of nerve fibers of the optical tract brings input from the retina upward. It means from the external world. The rest brings cortical predictive signal that meet the sensory ones, attenuating or enhancing them. This means that the brain actually controls the inputs and select only a little amount of the inputs received from the external world. So the brain continuously builds up a predictive model of the words that is based on long-term memories in order to read or select the inputs it receives from the sensory organs. This also has, let's say, a computational basis, because without a model, actually our brain mind will be overflooded continuously by the sensory inputs that actually surpasses our computational possibilities by number. I can give you an example. For example, the working memory that we use normally when we are aware is only about 7 plus 2 or minus inputs. So a very limited amount of information could be computed actually from the brain. So in this sense, perception, that means sensation coming from the outside world, and interoception that regards our own body, including orgasm, can be paradoxically better described as a fantasy or controlled hallucination. That's Barry Aniel set that we will probably have as a ghost and then in the following next year as a presentation about psychedelics. Control hallucination means, of course, that the model of the world is a fantasy. I mean, it's a construction, it's just a model. And through the sensory input is checked out. I mean, it is fine, it will continue to be used, otherwise it will be modified. This model came from psychophysics and theoretical biology, and that's, I think, is very important to bridge with the basic science, and says, as I say, that we actively build our perception through models or predictions, that what is outside our boundaries, we can think of a cell or the skin, or the limits of our own body. In theoretical physics, it's called Markov blanket. The boundaries is much more complicated than that, but I will skip it. And these let's say, basic models say that we palpate the sensorium according to this model. It was the description I used before, that is about this, the brain actually limiting or increasing the amount of input from the outside world. And in case of mismatch, of course, we change the external world with our muscle. Let's say, we change our model. So two different way of dealing with the reality. At this point, I will just using the pointer because maybe it's not enough and large, but anyway, let's say, for example, this is exteroceptive perception. That's the object, and actually the brain may send the model, let's say, and then receive a prediction error about the model in a circular way, and then he eventually modify the model or act to the world in order to match his own model. That's true also for the proprioception, that means movement also, the hand, or the internal body, let's say, that is interoception, and emotions are modelized in this way. And the point is, according to this model, or our other models as well, how can we conceptualize two or more individual body, minds interacting, having sex actually, according to the inferential brain model? Oh, sorry. And again, from physics, it's interesting that we can use a model that is called synchronization, and that is a widespread phenomenon from mechanics to neurophysiology. I have to say that is maybe there you can sorry. The pointer is confusing. This is a wall with a lot of clocks. Can you spot them? Oh, what is curious in a way that since the 17th century, more or less, has been discovered that oscillating clocks tend to synchronize. It's not entirely clear why, but that's a phenomenon that has been proved. So it seems like to be a natural phenomenon occurring, as I say, also in mechanics. This short, this little picture is about the event-related potential, so has to do with neurophysiology, and the same kind of phenomenon could be observed also between two, let's say, brains that start to oscillate or to be in synchrony after a while. Sorry. And so synchronization could be defined as a similar movements between two or more people who are temporally aligned. It's different from mimicry because, of course, which occurs after a short delay. Line dance, a military step, is an example. Sorry. Has been studied also the muscular bonding, that is the idea that moving in time evokes particular emotions. Think about dancing, for example. And in dyads, or that means groups of two people, synchronization has been demonstrated to increase affiliation, self-esteem, compassion, altruistic behavior, and increase rapport, of course. It's also been investigated as interpersonal synchrony. So there are evidence that it is occurring, let's say, widespreadly in the nature. Right? So we can say that every self-organizing biological system, that is the model of our species, each system actually samples the sensory inputs coming from the world according to the ecological niche it inhabits. It means if you are a bird, of course the ecological niche of birds is air and winds, of course ground as well. But it's completely different for us as humans, because we are a special eusocial kind of animals. And our niche is the group, actually, that maintains, assure our survival and homeostasis. We could say that you are a group of more or less synchronized individuals. Oh, sorry, ancora. And this could be a bridge again with infant research and child psychoanalysis, in which attunement and synchronization are other way of label synchronization. The child's social brain development starts with fetus intrauterine complex sensorial and biological interaction with the mother and with herself. There are terms that I will not explain, but like co-embodiment, co-homeostasis, microchimerism, that means that the cells of the mother are inside the body of the fetus, and vice versa. Self-exploration, self-stimulation, as maybe many of you knows about the twins' mutual exploration while inside the womb, and continues actually through infants' preverbal language exchange with the caregivers, that are bodily interaction via all senses, leading to the biological attunement and synchronization. That is also affective now we call it affective co-regulation and mentalization. And that, of course, include pain. I will skip, I'm sorry for the shortness of time, to talk more about touch and the affective touch. That's another word, and there's another paper by Friston and Fritt, if I remember well, is 2014, something like that. And they just simulate on the computer, using the model I was describing before, actually two birds singing. When they start to sing together, actually after a while, they tend to synchronize. That means they start to use the same tunes as Fritt and Friston proposed, to read the same hymn, I mean the same page of music, the synchronization. That's a mathematical model. Huh? But there are now also experimental demonstration of synchronization in ecological setting using this marvelous technology, hyperscanning, in which using simultaneous functional brain recordings of multiple subjects while they interact socially, it has been experimentally demonstrated that alternating action perception cycles, that means turn-taking conversation, so talking and listening and talking, between two brain minds produce actually a right temporoparietal junction generalized synchrony. These areas are specialized in social predictive models. That's a work, very recent work, 2022. Ancora. So we can say that reality for humans as a eusocial species, as self-organizing groups, usually tend to converge or agree upon the same delusion. Delusion with the means of a shared, co-constructed social prediction or narrative. It's a bit strong, but we'll try to explain better. Okay, there is a problem with the computer, but in any case, that slide was about the fact that, taking as example, as a metaphor, dancing, you need, in order to organize a generalized synchrony, to induce a generalized synchrony between two brains, actually you have to increase the input, the sensory input coming from the other. That means listening attentively, for example, and after a while, taking turns, start talking or leading the dance, and the other will be in the opposite position. This kind of dance, I will say, yes, a sort of cycle will induce the generalized synchrony, in which at a certain point, the two agents, the two brains, we share the similar view of the world, let's say, prediction or narrative. And this could be taken as the relational bedrock of psychoanalysis. There are historic scholars like Gottschall, they say we are made of stories transmitted by storytellers. And it is possible through verbal language, not only verbal, of course, the co-construction of meaningful shared narrative, not only limited to a dyad, but to the whole group of belonging. That's the oral transmission of models or priors. A narrative, in this sense, is an elaborated form of prediction based on the past, long-term memories, to define the present and imagining the future. Is a more or less coherent accumulation of narratives which share the same basic elements, such as customary beliefs, social forms, etc., that constitutes a culture. And so, orgasm is also, I will say, a cultural entity. Sexuality is not natural, is a cultural product, an embodied socio-cultural event, rather than only a biological response. We learn how to do it, and which are the social expectations or fantasies shaping our behaviors. For example, romantic love is definitely a cultural construction. Orgasm as an imperative in intimate sexual relationship is a social construction as well. In our Western culture, the presence or absence of orgasm is worked up as a symbolic of the intimacy or compatibility of a couple and the ability of an individual to function or perform the sexuality in a prescribed way, and is indicative of one's status in gender power relationship. But orgasms in themselves are not inherently good. It can be an expression, as we know very well, of domination, which can be playful or exploitative, depending on interpersonal context, in which the meaning of orgasm are negotiated and contested. Cultural stories shape individual expectations and response to each other's bodies. So the content of erotic fantasies do not depend on biology only, but much more on early experience regarding attachment. Infantile experience, in particular, if characterized by conflicts and relational trauma, are crucial. The discovery of a neurophysiological bond between pain and pleasure confirmed the clinically based link between mental pain and erotization, especially masturbation, where orgasm assumed the meaning of a self-reassuring, devaluating triumph over the hated one. That's the famous Stoller definition. And there is a clinically useful link between dreams and masturbation erotic fantasies, because both have their origin in the early relational matrix of emotional life. So erotic fantasies defend ourselves from potentially traumatic memories and restore our emotional self-esteem with a fantasized overcome of a shameful past event, where typically being refused is transformed into being desired. And I would say, I will propose that that's the biological basis for a classical defense mechanism, that is erotization. Back to the clinical case, erotization as defense against attachment. One day, G, having sex with one of her lovers, suddenly feels something absolutely new and scaring, a sort of time suspension and loss of control. She stops sex immediately and runs away at home. After several episodes of this kind, she is diagnosed with a medium severity brain tumor. After the first surgery, the first of several ones, she starts a psychotherapy where slowly she realizes her needs of true intimacy and the need to rely upon someone more fully. Her orgasm previously were not related to emotional intimacy at all, but on control and power over the other as a narcissistic triumph. A sync was possible with a partner in that way for her, but is also sync that is possible with a partner for each of us. I will say denying the emotional intimacy. But now her masturbation narratives about sexuality change in the direction of emotional sharing and mutual trust. But her dreams typically remain about death or sex, as I will say also, self-reassuring and affective regulation behavior. So that's also very important to stress. Of course, pleasure is not the first need of the human being. It's much more important, I will say, trust in the sense of attachment. That could be probably the first prior embedded in the social brain. As also Fotopulo, but also Solms, maintains or states now that of course assuring a reliable, safe relationship has a greater value for survival than pleasure and satisfaction. So, taking this quote from Donna Sterz, the interpersonal, very good, interpersonal psychoanalyst, that take into account the self-organizing system as a model of the brain and of psyche as well. Instead of thinking of narrative as a consciously purposeful construction, we should recast it as something on the order of a self-organizing system, in which outcomes are unpredictable and non-linear. The destabilization of all narratives, the old self, we could say, and the emergence of new ones are outcomes of unpredictable relational events inside, I will say, the analytic room. New narratives in psychoanalysis are the emergent, co-constructed, and the unbidden products of clinical process. And close to the end. So maybe we could say that love sex making from the social brain perspective is a generalized synchrony of two individuals in short-range bodily interaction, and it is a natural phenomenon that is typical of biological self-organizing system. The result is a shared generative models or narrative of the world, and joking a little with words means that playing under a shared Markov blanket, And the generalized synchrony could be considered a biophysical description of affective co-regulation in the form of love-making and mutual exchange of orgasmic state. Well, maybe I can skip it, but anyway, if you really push to the extreme this kind of modeling, of course, isolated self is a paradox. We think, then we are, and the relationship with another human being is always indirect and unstable, a matter of prediction, prejudice, potential distortions, which are updated in recurrent cycles of action, perception, and attempted synchrony towards a shared goal of synchronicity. That is a shared narrative model of the world and of the relationship. Of course, affective touch and touching wordings are the best tool we have to synchronize. I will stop here. Thank you.
Però intanto se qualcuno si prenota guadagniamo tempo con le domande. Devo dire effettivamente in mente mi vengono moltissime cose, ma aspetto le vostre domande perché poi noi avremo il nostro spazio nel pomeriggio, quindi non voglio rubare spazio. La dottoressa? Pacitto.
Volevo fare una domanda innanzitutto al professor Komsaruk. Allora, generalmente le persone... Ah, ok. Allora, la domanda è, le persone con l'andare avanti degli anni lamentano un decremento dello stato edonico, del piacere e quindi ovviamente anche del piacere sessuale. Allora, quindi non si prova più lo stesso godimento, ma in molti altri aspetti della vita. Allora, quanto questo non è collegato al decremento della produzione di dopamina? Perché se tutti... No? Perché vede, se tutti potessimo arrivare a 120 anni, molto probabilmente diventeremmo tutti parkinsoniani. Allora la domanda che mi ponevo era appunto questo fatto, e questa è la prima domanda. Ok.
Well, I don't know if there's any evidence to support or refute what you're asking. I'm just not familiar with any evidence like that. But I guess if there's an increase in tremor, then one could assume that there's a decrease in dopamine. But it's an interesting question, what will happen with aging, long aging. But I don't know of any.
No data.
Not that I know of, no.
Ricordiamo che per quelli online che possono scrivere in chat tranquillamente in italiano, in inglese, francese e spagnolo, perché Claudio conosce tantissime lingue e quindi poi sintetizza per voi. E intanto se c'è qualcun altro, se no altrimenti la dottoressa aveva una seconda veloce domanda.
Ok, a proposito della immaginazione e della fantasia che produce stati orgasmici, il meccanismo qual è? Il meccanismo della simulazione incarnata? No, mi viene questa domanda spontanea, siccome avviene per altre cose, se io immagino...
Sì, no, tranquilla, perché il concetto di simulazione incarnata richiede la conoscenza del minimo del modello di minimo del modello di Gallese, nonché quello di Domhoff, nonché quelli di altri. Quindi lui come sessologo
ok.
non so se è
ok.
andata a studiare cosa Gallese ci dice, proviamo, se no gli rispondiamo noi, ne abbiamo in abbondanza, oppure il dottor Castellet, magari ha una domanda più diretta a noi.
Una buona domanda. It's a good question. Of course, we should study more about it, in the sense that, as far as I know, Gallese never talk about sexuality, actually. But it is a good point.
Sì, allora, ok.
Oh, we have studied women who can have orgasms just by thinking, and I was very skeptical about that possibility. So we did a study where we measured heart rate and blood pressure and pupil dilation and pain threshold in women who said that they could have orgasms just by thinking. And we found, we also asked them to elicit orgasm by genital self-stimulation. So we got the responses when they had the orgasm by physical self-stimulation, and we got their responses when they had their orgasm just by thinking. There's 10 women. And we found that the increase in blood pressure and increase in heart rate, dilation of the pupils, and increase in pain threshold were equivalent, regardless of whether they had their orgasm by physical stimulation or by thinking. So they really had orgasms.
And Barry, also, it is possible to have orgasm during dream.
And during dreams.
This is also the same mechanism, I think.
Yeah, and as John Money showed, orgasms during dreams in women with and men with spinal cord severed spinal cord, no sensory input from the genitals. So it can't. So orgasm is something that happens in the brain, and I've done a little bit of functional MRI in the women who say they have orgasm when they have orgasm just by thinking, and we find very similar brain activity to when they have orgasms from physical stimulation. So the brain is very powerful. And also the idea of being able to think about the stimulation, it really activates the regions of the brain that respond to the stimulation. It's very, very powerful. It's surprising, but it's true.
And for example, think about dissociation mechanism. Now, the ability of the brain to cut off completely the sensory inputs. Now, dissociation state, which you just dream away or fly away even if your body remains in the traumatic situation. So that's another proof in a way that this model, I would say, about informational brain has something very interesting, at least, because it explains, for example, hallucination, delusion, because there's another narratives that are not shared by the group, but narrative per se as the other one. So reality is a construction, it's not something real, in the sense of touching. Okay.
Ceccati Bogliatto, vai. Il microfono. No, il microfono perché sennò non ci... was there. You needed to talk in the microphone for the live people. Yeah?
Well, maybe my question, it's a little bit a crossroad question for you, Barry Komisaruk and Francesco Castellet, and concerning the beginning of your presentation about the experiment with on mouse and the stimulation of a false pregnancy, I would say, and the power of, of the denial of pregnancy for women. And the link between, of course, all the neuronal pathways and the influence of the hormonal that you just described before for us. And I was wondering also, do you have an idea about what kind of mechanisms could also illustrate the denial of a pregnancy, and Castellet, the strength of denial, of not listening to bodily sensations coming from the inside, and until, denial of pregnancy can be very, very strong, is very strong, and is also apparent. It can be until the end of the pregnancy, and the body doesn't change.
Kati, what do you mean exactly by denial of the pregnancy?
It's a delusional.
Delusion. Okay. False pregnancy, you mean? Okay.
No, not false. A real pregnancy. A real pregnancy. Women are in a denial. Some women are in a denial of a pregnancy and arrive in emergency.
Okay.
It's a denial. Okay, so
True pregnancy.
Yes. You wanted to reply one-to-one or at the end? One-to-one. Okay.
I say there's a good question because it is exactly illustrating the power of the model. In the sense, reality is made and not done from the sensory input. So, of course, all kind of delusions are not distinguishable from the shared reality. In the sense, for the person, that's real. There are maybe more simple explanation, for example, other phenomena, like, for example, a mother that is actually crushing all its spinal segments in order to save the son that is being at risk to be crushed by a car, and she stops the car, crushing all her spinal cord without any pain. So, you mean, that's the power of the model. In a sense, he explains something that physiologically, you say, it cannot happen. You should be in touch with your body. And the model is very precise because the Markov blanket, this theorization, says that even the body is outside of the brain in the sense of the capacity of being touched directly. Not only external reality, but also our own body. And this explains a lot of things. For example, that we need doctors, physicians. We cannot diagnose disease by ourselves. Nonetheless, it should be ourself. It's not. Our body is not ourself. It has strange symptoms. We don't understand what is what. We are not aware of the whole of body. Exactly for the same reasons. It will be too much. The brain is not able to compute all the inputs. It has to select. And the best way of selecting is having a model. Then I update the model. And the model concerns also the interior organs, the functioning of the body and so on.
Giusto per chiarire, lui sta parlando dal punto di vista del Markov blanket, quindi dobbiamo assumere che abbiamo un generative model in tutto questo che attraverso cui leggere quello che lui sta dicendo e che ha ben spiegato nelle diapositive. Come vedete abbiamo molti modelli, non riusciamo a discuterli tutti perché uno è quello dell'embodied simulation, questo è quello della computational mind, poi abbiamo il modello nostro psicoanalitico. Teniamo insieme tutti questi pezzi dicendo che, come diciamo sempre, poi alla fine la clinica ci unisce, ci spiega molte cose e ci ritroviamo comunque nei vari modelli con cui spieghiamo la clinica. Barry, volevi dire qualcosa?
Regarding your question about whether there could be a mental influence on pregnancy or denial of pregnancy, I don't know of any specific data on that, but there are examples of emotional states that influence hormone secretion. Certainly the example of women no longer menstruating during war, during the stress of war. There's evidence of conditioned hormone response. The classical evidence is conditioned oxytocin release. I don't know of any thing specifically for progesterone, but in the case of oxytocin, the Vandermark and Hayes study with cows, where the cows started to release milk, which is oxytocin release, in response to the sound of the milk pails when the technician came into the room carrying the milk pail. So the sound of the milk pail, the anticipation, the sound of the milk pan was of the rattling of the milk cans was enough to trigger the release of oxytocin. And certainly there are all kinds of, every sensory modality can influence, sensory activity can influence hormone secretion. Seasonal reproduction, the increasing light cycle is a classic view. An old example of a pigeon looking into a mirror would release eggs. Seeing her own reflection in the mirror, that's visual, and there's auditory. Hearing the alarm clock releases corticoids, the stress, or tactile stimulation, mating-induced ovulation in cats and several species. It's relatively rare. There are examples, many examples of the brain influencing hormone secretion, but I don't know of anything specifically in the case of pregnancy.
There are a couple of questions from
maybe we have Blas and Davide, and then a couple of...
but one question is again answering to Kathy. So
just a moment. Blas maybe give us... okay? Blas, go.
Is it your question,
Yes,
Heribert, connected
go.
to Kathy's or not really?
Not directly.
So wait for a moment.
Okay. Wait.
So, yes, Kathy, I just wanted to answer myself. As a gynecologist, I saw some pseudo-pregnancies when I was in gynecology. And, as Barry was saying, there is a close interaction between the hypophysis and the hypothalamus, so the brain, and then the reproductive organs. So it was at the time quite common, and even in the past century, this kind of blockage of the system, of the endocrine system. And so there was the stopping the amenorrhea, so the stopping of the menstrual cycle and all the symptoms of pregnancy. Nowadays, because of all the technology and the ultrasounds, it's much less common, of course, because the pseudo-pregnancy are immediately understood. So there is an impact with reality, but it is a kind of delusion which was not so rare in the past. So there is a question here from the online audience which says she asks how, and this is a very important question. I wanted to comment also myself. It is the question is how the denial of the pregnancy, in case, for example, of young girls when they go on with their pregnancy and they don't recognize, so there is a denial attitude, how it is possible that it is shared by the family. Because usually these patients go to the delivery room and the family doesn't know. So this is a very interesting comment. And she say, we see patients in the emergency room who think they have a kidney problem or an abdominal problem, and they go, they give birth in the emergency room. So, and everybody is surprised, and the family is surprised. So if someone wants to comment about this. Yes, but it is a collective denial.
Yeah, this is the answer. It's a group denial. This is the answer. Blas, please.
Yes, first of all, I want to thank you, both of you. I was I'm very grateful to your lectures. I have one question which just follows the, for me, convincing interconnection between orgasm and the avoidance of pain. As you mentioned Stoller, I was reminded that Stoller also spoke of perversion as the erotic form of hatred. And you also showed a picture of rape. And so, and my question, which came to my mind, is could you say something about the potential interrelation between orgasm and also aggression, and also the connection between pain and aggression, because, or violence, yeah? Because I think sexuality very often is connected to violent feelings, and I wonder whether this could also be interrelated to avoidance of pain or something else.
In fact, here the primates, the apes, comes to help. I mean, of course, chimpanzees seems to be a very good biological model for it, in the sense that the difference between us and the primates is not about, let's say, the old parts of the brain, but I will say the main difference is they do not have cultural evolution. So they remain at that stage in which we were probably many millions of years ago, and so on, while we are growing on the experience of the others. And culture so is the main, actually, at the point, what really the evolution has to do for us is about culture. So cultural evolutions. I will say that we start as bonobo chimps, and according to our first years of life, and so early relational attunement or disattunement, we shift towards one type or the other, or a kind of mixing of the two. But we have the biological basis to behave both ways. I will say this. And violence, quoting a bit Freud, is about also the power, no? The pulsion of power over the other, the possession of the other. It has an evolutional meaning, of course, that has to do, for example, in this group of animals, there is the dominance of the male, so the power and the fight has to do with having your own group of female to use for reproduction, no? That's the model, in a way. So aggressiveness, submission of the female, attacking the rivals has to do with this kind of grouping, let's say. It's part of the human as well, we know. Okay.
We have, do you want to say, add something? Yes.
I think it's really complex in the case of humans, but maybe a trivial example of this kind of the merging or the confusion among high intensity activity. In the case of rats, rat behavior, there's a paradigm called tail pinch, that if a number of experiments have shown that if you pinch the tail of a rat, put a clamp on the tail, and so they start becoming very active, and then depending on what is in their environment, they show some behavior that's somehow related. If you give them, if you put food in front of them, then with the tail, while the tail is being pinched, they start eating, and if you have water, they start drinking. If you have live rat pups, they pick up the pups. So they do something. They're driven to do something, and then they do something somehow related to what's available to do something at. whether that is something that could account for sexual motivation producing violence, or, I mean, that may be related to that in some way. Just the high arousal, got to do something, and it's expressed in terms of something in the environment, some kind of discharge, you know. But that's just a possible, you know, just a thought. But it's probably much more complicated than that.
We have time just for another question, maybe Shervé. And I would like to say to you in the afternoon, it's really late, sorry for this, but in the afternoon we are going to talk about rage system, sexual system. So we talk again about sexuality, and maybe Davide, you can give you, and the doctor there, we can give you your question this afternoon. Shervé, just one question, and then we have lunch.
Thank you a lot for the contributions. I learned a lot, and I thank about that. And I am very curious to listen to you. So I have a first question to Barry Komisaruk. Do you make a difference inside the erotic experience between the jouissance, the sexual enjoyment, and the orgasm? I remarked that in your lists, you often write the question mark just nearby erotic pleasure. So my first question. My second question for you also came first on the table already. It's about the source of the erotic desire. How do you think the link between external sensory stimuli and those emanating from imagination and fantasies? What is the link between both, and how? Because we could think about two sources. It's not satisfying. So we have to make a link to find where is the sources. To Francesco Castellet, I have another question about perception about the difference of the sex, the perception and the difference of the sexes, which is so important for the psychoanalysts. The perception of external world allows us to perceive, of course, the differences, especially between male and female, not a problem, but it allows also to be sensible to what is missing, not only to what exists, but to what is missing to each one. Psychoanalysis gives a great importance to the effect of this perception of the lax. How do you think these effects of the lax on the erotic desire? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're asking a question about what is the erotic sense, and you know, I think there's something paradoxical about the erotic sense. There's evidence that the nucleus accumbens, which we see activated during orgasm, is this question of Berridge and Krinkleback, is it wanting or liking? And the nucleus accumbens is activated during wanting, and it's activated during liking, and it's activated during orgasm. And I just wonder whether the erotic sense is the combination, the simultaneous combination of wanting and liking, wanting the stimulus and getting the stimulus. And this is also related to the expectation, this template, that if we want and we get concurrently, simultaneously, that is a very unusual situation. We get exactly what we want, but we still want it, and we still get it, and it's a circle: want and like, get and want and get and want and get. More and more, we want more strongly. We get more strongly. We want still more strongly. It's this kind of conflict, but not only it's a conflict, but a resolution of the conflict at the same time. Maybe this is the quality of erotic pleasure. But you know, I don't know. But it's you know, just to try to account for some small brain activity that we see in terms of how that has been interpreted. But it's just a hypothesis, you know, just an idea.
Only 30 seconds to a very complex question, but fascinating. I will say fascinating. I will address just the last one because it is also a kind of concentrate about the issue. The issue is about the lack of. And I will say the lack of what? Of the desire of the other, no? They say. And this desire of the other is useful from also this point of view, the social brain, I will say. Because we are, no, I am if we are in a way, so I need always the object, always the other. And the other, of course, has to have an emotional link with me. I have to be important, let's say, to be desired of. Huh? And orgasm actually is, I will say, always reach when the fantasy is fulfilled in this sense. The fantasy of what? Of the presence of someone desiring me. So I'm finally important. I'm included in the group, not excluded. And violence, for example, is this attempt to enter with force inside the group, inside another person, to be really someone at the end. Of course, it's destroying also the other, but that's another point. So the model of linking sexuality with early relational life is very useful, in my opinion, because include the group from the start, immediately. And well, there is a lot to discuss. For example, the little a novel, Lacan, is very interesting. Why desire is triggered actually by a portion of the body. Apparently, really, I don't know. We have to discuss about it.